here recording at Manifest the Future of Supply Chain here in Las Vegas. I am with Matt with WSI. Matt, looking forward to the conversation today. But I'd like to start by getting to know you a little bit better. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Matt Schroeder. I've been with WSI for, I think, 7 years now, 6-7 years. Prior to that, practiced real estate law. But been around logistics for quite some time, and I oversee a lot of our investment, pricing, and then also real estate decisions.
Okay. You promised to let me talk a little bit about economics today because, interested in economics, it's kind of my thing. And I specifically want to talk about how it relates to real estate because that's a background that you have and some kind of trends that have been going on. But I want to ask you a little bit more about what you see right now going on as far as commercial construction. And I talk a lot about residential construction on my podcast platforms, but I'd like to hear your insights too on the commercial side. What's going on? Are interest rates having an impact? Just tell me more about what you're seeing.
Yeah, so you're having in some markets negative net absorption, which is effectively there's more space coming on the market than being taken off the market, which is kind of unique. Hasn't really happened in the industrial sector for quite a few years until somewhat recently. So the interest rates are having an impact. The difficult thing is that it takes probably between entitlements and building everything, something like 2 years to build an industrial space, right?
Okay.
So there's a big lag from when, interest rates increased and maybe things are cooling down a bit and all of that until you actually stop sort of new starts. So the people who've already broken ground are already 6-12 months in, they kind of need to complete it. And then you'll see spaces will kind of just sit empty. And developers or people who build them who have more money are willing to sort of sit on empty space, but other ones have a hard time because it's very expensive to sit on that space. You can't really put in permanent financing unless and until you get a permanent tenant in place. So, we're looking at some buildings that have maybe sat empty for a year, sometimes maybe even longer. An affiliate of ours actually just bought a building in Southern California that had been sitting, originally intended to build it and hold, and then sat empty for quite some time. So we actually, scooped it up and now operate a facility in there. So the interest rates being high have sort of stemmed new starts, but curiously haven't had quite the impact in primary markets you might have expected to see on cap rates. So cap rates in primary markets are still kind of lower, and frankly, probably even in some cases lower than interest rates you'd get if you went out and got a loan to buy the buildings now. So.
Right. Are there any specific geographies within the U.S. or even North America that you're seeing have more of a boost in their commercial construction right now, or are the real estate markets hotter, cooler anywhere that you've noticed any trends?
So, interestingly enough, I would say that like Dallas and then kind of the Jersey, Pennsylvania area have stayed relatively strong. California, I would say still is, but is being hurt a bit, probably because it jumped. I mean, rates, there was a building we looked at leasing in, I want to say like 2020 at 70 cents net. And they were like, we're going to wait till we think the market's heating up. Well, it did. I think it ultimately leased out at something like $1.20 net or even $1.40 net. So pretty huge increase pretty quickly in rates. And so California, because of that big spike, has sort of come down a bit. I think in areas like a Dallas or like a Pennsylvania, Jersey, it didn't quite jump quite as much. And so you're still seeing a little bit of increase. And you're still seeing a bit of starts there because the market is still stronger. California, I think people are pulling back a bit, but that's probably due to they just built whatever they could. I mean, they were finding any little nugget of space they could, even if literally I looked at a building, a school was right next door, and they're like, oh, you actually can't operate other than from like 7 to 7. I'm like, it's a fulfillment warehouse. It's probably going to need to be able to operate 24 hours. We didn't lease that one, but they were putting them everywhere they could for a while.
Yeah, I think when the early in the pandemic, when we shifted all of our imports domestically after the insane backlog in the LA Long Beach area, we moved a lot of things to East Coast and Gulf Coast ports, and the infrastructure investment that had to go into, obviously not just those ports ramping up, but things come off of these ships and they go into warehouses usually. They need transloading, right? So we had a large investment in these facilities being built in Savannah, in Charleston, in Houston, and New York, New Jersey. So have we kind of completed that? Are we kind of at least coming back to more of a normalization from that surge?
I would say so. Your TEU imports at a lot of these East Coast ports and Houston stuff, they've grown certainly, but it's not, things have kind of normalized. So when you look at relative to what it was year over year, it might be like a 4 or 5% growth. It's not a 30% growth or something like that. And actually that is another market. Houston has been quite robust and stayed pretty strong. I don't know how much of that's tied to oil versus other stuff, but that's another market we're looking at as well. Just a lot of strong demand.
Very cool. So specifically within real estate, can you just kind of talk me through a little bit more, how is WSI engaging in the actual, it sounds like you guys are leasing or procuring space in the warehousing sector. So what do you have to pay attention to? How are you looking to capitalize on opportunities in the real estate space when it comes to these commercial facilities?
Sure.
Any insights you want to share there?
Yeah, no, it's been interesting because there's been sort of a bifurcation in the market between kind of newer Class A space and then your older kind of Class B or C space. And for us, we sort of straddle a variety of verticals. And so some of our verticals really kind of cater more to that older space, and some don't. So like fulfillment, for example, you really want it high and tight. You want a high clear height as much as you can, and newer buildings along those lines. But for something like chemical, you actually have, it's really hard to put it in a newer building because you almost have to put in a false ceiling. You run into a whole new set of regs when you go above 30-foot sort of clear height in the chemical space. And you really, newer buildings, like the new just random spec building that a lot of people build, don't really work for a lot of these chemicals that might, need more fire suppression, things of that nature. And it honestly becomes a big CapEx headache because to drop a ceiling, for example, is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's quite
So
difficult.
I'm curious because I would have to imagine that we're only going to be increasing in like regulatory aspects just every year, right? Like we always find more things to regulate, to create rules around. And so what happens to all of the warehouse space that currently exists that doesn't meet new regulations for a lot of industries? Does it stay and it remains cheaper? Are we having to see new investment come in to update it? Are we just building new because we don't want to deal with the headache? Like what has kind of been the solution to that?
So the answer is, not shockingly, it depends. Forgive me, I'm a lawyer. But it becomes a trade-off. So at a certain point, a lot of these buildings start to become economically obsolete. So effectively, you can only store it one high in bulk, right? Because the sprinkler system isn't good enough to let you go multiple high. And so it's like, okay, well, then you might generate, like 50 cents a square foot when you really want to be generating like $1.50 a square foot in rent revenue. And so you need to make that trade-off. Like, is the building a third the price of a normal building? And at a certain point, it really becomes like quite hard, that tipping point where it's like, oh, you really probably need to spend the money to improve the infrastructure on it. But some of these buildings, you do run into an issue where at the end of the day, you just can't stack high enough. And basically that building, like either A, you need to price super, super cheaply, or, we're seeing buildings in particular areas like California where there's no place to go. They're buying a building, they're tearing it down, and then they're putting a new building on top of it because there's nothing else to do. The problem is your cost per foot just for the dirt at that point, once you've bought something, torn it down, level the slab, everything becomes really, really expensive. And so that drives up. That's where you're seeing in, primary areas like heavy zones around Long Beach, LA, you might see $600 a foot. And that's just kind of what it is. Because to literally build it, you gotta, it's probably going to be 500 plus a foot, and then you need a return on top of that. So
I think that probably just has added to the appetite for exploring different metros, because it's just categorically cheaper to create infrastructure and to source labor and other things in other parts of the country. And I think we're getting a lot more confident from a transportation and logistics and supply chain just standpoint in general at being able to have a more flexible supply chain. And we're kind of moving more to these regional distribution models, or actually utilizing inland hubs instead of, doing everything from ports. So it's been interesting to watch that evolution. And I would imagine, as space continues to constrict and become more expensive in certain areas, teams are going to start getting creative and hunting down new metros.
Yeah, I mean, LA particularly is interesting. You've got mountains and an ocean, which limits a lot of what you can do. You kind of have to just go east, and then you hit more mountains, so that's fun. But at the end of the day, like, a house in LA is pushing almost $1,000 a foot. And so if people want to live in that place, the housing's just more expensive. So whoever owns it's like, yeah, I'll sell it to you for $600 a foot. You're going to go do your thing. You're going to sell it for $1,000, $1,200 bucks a foot, whatever. The warehouses aren't paying $1,000 a foot. It doesn't work for them. So at the end of the day, housing is generally going to be more expensive, and warehouses will get pushed out. The ironic thing is, again, the people living in the houses need stuff delivered from somewhere. So there's that interesting trade-off. But I live kind of a little bit in the middle of nowhere. So I get the 2-day Amazon instead of, the people who get the same day. Same day, one day. Okay, you talked a lot about pricing. I like talking about pricing. I like specifically talking about pricing when we're talking economics and we're talking markets, because it's all connected, right? But what types of solutions are you guys pricing? When you say, I know from your background that you're involved in pricing at WSI, so are we talking warehouse, over-the-road transportation? What types of pricing strategies are you guys using too? So we're focused primarily, we do have a small brokerage, which we're growing, but for me, at least what I oversee and what I focus on a lot is pricing in terms of warehousing and fulfillment stuff. So if you need stuff stored, pick, pack, all of that, that's generally what.
So walk me through, don't give away all your secrets, but walk me through what you need to pay attention to make these educated decisions on pricing. I mean, you have customers probably depending on your guys' pricing, accuracy, and competitiveness and things like this. So what are you looking at when you are pricing, from like what outside factors impact your market that you have to take into consideration when you're coming up with these prices?
Sure. So real estate costs are a big one, and you run into this interesting circumstance where oftentimes 3PLs are committing to longer term leases. So let's say it's 5 to 7 years. With the run-up of the last few years, you'll have some people who signed a lease, and relative to what the market is. So the market might be 80 cents net, but they're paying 60 cents net. And so some 3PLs will pass that savings on to their customer in the hopes that they can keep a customer. The problem is having to go tell your customer when your lease expires in another year, hey, we need to give you a 35% increase. Customers don't like that a whole lot. And oftentimes, they're not as familiar with the market, so they'll be like, well, that's crazy. We need to price check. Well, by the time they come back to you after price checking, your landlord might have moved on, because your window to extend this option you had to extend the lease might have been 2 months, and the customer didn't get back to you. So you can end up in the circumstance where, like, it really is sort of exogenous shock. For us, we try to be ahead of it. We try to make sure we're pricing at market so we don't have these big shocks to our customers at various points.
What about also like sharing those insights with your customers? Even when they're in, let's say they're in like a 5-year lease, do you still try to provide some guidance on where market's moving over those 5 years so that it doesn't have to be like that hard conversation in year 5?
I mean, we do. Oftentimes they don't necessarily always care as much as maybe we'd hope they do.
Right.
But yeah, so there certainly have been some interesting discussions from customers about, hey, like the market sort of is what it is. The other thing too is you'll see because we straddle all these verticals, certain verticals kind of can't afford to pay for certain markets anymore, because storage might be a huge percentage of their supply chain costs, whereas other verticals like fulfillment, storage is a very small part. Again, certain industries different. Apparel might be, they're very storage heavy, but like, these guys, for example.
I was going to say, I always love to talk about beverages.
Yeah.
Because we're talking like bottled water.
Yeah.
You can get like 70 bottles of water for like $3 at Sam's Club or something.
Yeah.
And so we can't not you're making pennies on the dollar in that space. And
Yeah.
so every cent per mile you pay in transportation, every dollar that goes to storing that outside of just production lines, coming off production lines, is costly, eats directly into a little bit of margin that they have. So they're more sensitive to their storage costs and their holding costs, right?
But interestingly enough, transportation is way more important than that.
Yeah.
Because these things are actually like pretty heavy, right? Relatively speaking. So they weigh out relative to cubing out. And as a result of that, for them, for us, we, in fulfillment at least, are really focused on 4 of our locations. We've got like 30 some all over the country. But for the fulfillment stuff, it's been really great for Hopwater, for example, because we've got multiple locations we're shipping out of, and they're able to save a ton on transportation because shipping something really heavy a long distance becomes extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah.
So for them, hey, I might be willing to pay the extra money to be located in Fontana, California, for example, to address the LA market. Whereas, if you're a giant paper roll, being in Fontana, California and having a ton of inventory there might be tough because you have all this inventory and it's not a huge difference whether you're shipping to LA or some other part of the country if you're in Fontana versus, say, Denver or whatever it might be.
And I mean, I would just like to add, I've been talking about this for a couple of years, several years now. When you talk to carriers, the actual trucking companies, these mid-sized fleets, if you ask them like, hey, what's your preference? Do you want to be running all over the country all the time? Or do you want to like focus on a geographical region and run there and back triangles, shorter lengths of hauls, get your drivers home, add consistency? They're going to say the latter. And they're also going to price better in that space because that's what they want. That's what they're looking for. And that's kind of how we're trending. We have a lot of factors going into that. One of them just being like, it has to be attractive to want to get in a truck these days. And, like we have less people interested in doing that.
Really
they
hard.
definitely don't want to go all over the place for months at a time. So they like that consistency. So it's kind of all of these things coming together because when we're talking about moving to a more regionalized distribution model, like you just mentioned, there's good benefits on the warehousing side, speed to which you can reach your customers and your products. But then also lower transportation costs because you're stepping right into like an optimized network of providers within those regions.
No, exactly. And it makes a big difference. You can take advantage of regional carriers, for example. It really, really makes a massive difference. And to your point, you really want to optimize your entire supply chain and think about the entire cost. And that's going to include transportation, storage, handling, all of it.
Yeah. Well, we are running out of time, but if anyone is interested in learning more about you, connecting with you, you're on LinkedIn, I believe.
Yes, I am.
Yes, so you guys can find him on LinkedIn. You can also be sure to check out WSI at their website if you have any other questions. If you're at Manifest, stop by their booth. They have some cool beverages, some cool golf balls. I'll be taking some with me. So appreciate you guys for having me over here, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.